Pearson, the host of Decisions Now, a podcast brought to you by eValueServe about how to leverage data and AI to improve your business decisions. Today, we're joined by our guest, Bill Franks. Bill is the director of the Center for Data Science and Analytics at Kennesaw State University and the former chief analytics officer at Teradata and the International Institute for Analytics. He's an internationally recognized thought leader, speaker, and author in the fields of analytics and data science. And he's even written several books, including Winning the Room, Creating and Delivering an Effective Data-Driven Presentation, which is actually the topic we're going to be focusing on a lot today. So Bill, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Bill is going to join us to explore how to create and deliver impactful data-driven presentations, particularly in live settings. So let's just jump right into it. In recent years, we've seen a significant increase in data-driven decision-making across all industries. However, many organizations are struggling to communicate these data insights effectively. So from your experience, what do you see as the primary factors contributing to this communication gap in today's business landscape?
Yeah, I think it's the classic problem of technical people, whether they're, in this case, data analysts. I think it applies similarly to engineers. It would also apply to accountants, people who do something technical for a living, not remembering that the people that they're doing their work for are explicitly not technical in that area, and that's why they've been hired to do it. And often then being unable to step back and say, all right, if I'm in a class around analytics, I'm going to have to go into all of these model metrics and how the models are created. But that business sponsor doesn't care about that. And so the point I always make to people is to think about, data literacy has been a hot topic for the last however many years, probably at least 5 to 6 years. The key is most people mistake that literacy is reading, which is true, but it's also writing. If you look it up in the dictionary, it's reading and writing, sending and receiving. And that's the key, I think, to if people want to close this gap is you'll hear the technical people complaining that their business sponsors don't get it and need to be more educated, but you'll hear the business people complaining how the technical people aren't able to speak their language and so forth. And each of them are partially correct, but they often make the mistake of blaming it all on the other team. And in fact, data literacy is about each of them trying to move to the middle, and the business people should try and understand the topics a bit more deeply maybe than they do today. But then if I'm presenting information around some type of complex analysis that I've done, I have to put it in language, and it's on me to help them understand as well. Just like if I'm speaking to an elementary school audience, I have to make sure I'm speaking at a level that they'll understand.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like there's also either there's new roles that could be emerging because of this, as somebody could literally be there to bridge the gap between what is the data and what does it mean in a storytelling component to the person who is going to be leveraging it. Or it's just people need to start, increasing their skill set as individuals as well and learning the other components of it. So there can be that stronger literacy on both ends.
I think it's both of those. I think it's on everybody. If you're going to have a career in a technical field, so you could be in a pure research capacity, whether at a university or at a large technology company, for example. And maybe in those cases, you don't have to be as good at translating to the non-technical audience because you're insulated. But particularly if whether you're going to be in consulting or if you're going to work at a large company doing marketing analytics, you're going to have to partner with the marketing team. That's basically your client. I think you have to become better, but a lot of companies also have in recent years, and I've written a ton about this and have whole talks on it about the emerging roles in analytics organizations. And one of them is what's often called an analytic translator, which is you identify the people who are really good at bridging that gap. And whether it's a full-time job or just a role they help with at critical points in time, they're tasked with, all right, this is a critical project for a critical team. We're going to send you in to help make sure that it's being translated correctly from the business to the technical team at the outset. And then on the back end, as the results are delivered, translating it back. And so it's a very real trend of a lot of companies at least acknowledging the need for people who play that role again, even though it's often not a true full-time job. It's something that certain people have as part of their job duties.
Yeah. And honestly, I really like what you mentioned. A lot of people, I think they just think of taking the data and giving it to executives or the business end users. But there is that two-way communication that's certainly needed, that you also need to be clear about what type of data do you need in the first place so that they can actually gather the right information for you to then make the analysis on at a later point in time. So, one of the other things that you've been talking a lot about is the analytics revolution, and of course, bridging the gap between big data and practical application. So, what do you think companies are still getting wrong about trying to turn data into actionable insights?
Yeah, so the whole premise of the analytics revolution, and it's funny, I think I probably wrote the book 2 years too early in the sense of, at the time I was at a large technology company working with many of the biggest companies in the world. So I saw the struggles they were having, but I had kind of, let's say, a preview of it. It wasn't public yet per se. But it's the same thing happening today, which is we've taken back when I started, if we were even going to do marketing models to target customers, it was all done in a batch process. So I would literally build a model. I would literally score the customers. I would send them to you. And in the original days when they were still doing direct, I mean, we still do direct mail, but the direct mail process of those days was I'd get you your list a month ahead of the mailing. And so there was no real time aspect, and the scale required was, can it run by the morning if I kick it off? Well, now that you're optimizing a website in real time and kicking off a follow-up email, et cetera, and you need to iterate again and again and again, it becomes much like an assembly line and the industrial revolution. That's why I kind of liken it to the industrial revolution of analytics, where do you get as much variation in products when they're mass produced? Not necessarily, but you're getting a much higher consistency and quality, and you know that you're going to get what you've asked for time and again effectively. And for the most part, people are willing to give up having everything be bespoke. Now, you can still go to an arts festival and buy some custom made art and such. So it's not that people don't still have custom made things, but a lot of what we buy is mass produced. And that's where really analytics is headed now, where there's a lot of these automated processes that are just running at scale, maybe millions of website visits an hour, getting updated page by page. And that requires a different philosophy. And I think the biggest struggle companies have, other than the technology aspect of enabling that scale, is to sit back and say, our goal is no longer to have the necessarily the best possible model for that will optimize every individual instance, because that's not feasible from a processing time and cost perspective. But to say, given the realistic constraints we have, how can I have a really solid model that's going to perform really well, that will fall within my budget? And that's the hardest part that I think technical people struggle with, like me. You grow up, you want to build the perfect model. And these days, actually, the perfect model may not be implementable. And you have to back off some of the model power to have something that can run more quickly and less expensively in order to get the scale that you need.
Yeah. And also the model that's going to get the most use as well. So I think a lot of that actually goes into the storytelling that goes behind it, as well. So when you actually have the models ready and you are putting everything together and then you're starting to share it, one of the most effective techniques to helping people understand the data is to create a story around it. So how can storytelling transform data presentation into a compelling narrative? And what are the strategies that you would recommend to distilling this complex information into the clear and impactful messages that are needed without overwhelming the audience that's seeing it?
Yeah, I guess the core theme I always stress there is, to remember in context of you're delivering a presentation to a live audience, right? That means you're presenting, you're up there talking. The point of that ought to be that they're coming to listen to you talk. So, for example, if I'm going to send you a long email or a big written report that you have, in theory, unlimited time to sit and read and digest and think about, then I'm going to pack a lot more stuff in than when I'm up in front of a room. First of all, you want the slides to support what you're talking about, right? So folks will go and put tons of words, tons of graphics. It's very complicated, and everyone in the room is distracted looking at that, trying to figure it out rather than listening to you. So the line I always tell students, for example, is every second that they're reading your slide or thinking about something on your slide that you haven't gotten to yet because you didn't use animations to build it out is another second they're not listening to you, and they might misinterpret, get confused, get lost, and you're never going to get them back. So I think the biggest challenge is to remember there's a lot of things and there's only a small subset of what you know that you should actually show. And the rest of it should be your talking points and your narrative around that to get people to believe there's something real that they want to act upon. And the reality is, if you can convince them of that, there's all the time in the world to have a follow-up meeting, to go through it in more detail, to give them that detailed set of technical backup behind it that they can become comfortable with. But it's really, you should think of every presentation more or less, it's a sales presentation. What you're selling is your results, and you want the focus on you. So simple charts, short text, long on narrative, and making it very relevant and exciting to your audience in terms of how does it help them and what ought they do, as opposed to what you did and why technically what you did was appropriate for their problem.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I just keep thinking about the kind of like the gag gifts, but the mugs that say another meeting that should have been an email. So that's certainly not what you want your presentations to be. Is if you're just going to be reading off of a PowerPoint, you might as well just send it to them and then let them come back with their questions, and then just set up a discussion afterwards to answer their questions. You don't need to read something to somebody else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just a side question. So I think it's Jeff Bezos, I believe, is quite famous for saying that he doesn't like to have presentations. So in any meeting, he makes sure that people have a handout that they can read for the first 20 or so minutes of the meeting, and then they can discuss it. Is that an approach that you have ever used in any of your trainings?
Well, in a different way. So I guess when I'm, like my book is about, you've been asked to give a presentation. So
Uh-huh.
I think I like Bezos's approach, but what he's trying to do there is avoiding the presentation and saying, you give us what we need. And then it's kind of like your idea. If all I have to tell you is exactly what's in the PowerPoint or in this document, then there's no point to have a whole separate meeting for me to present it. Go ahead and read it and we ask questions. So I think he's going he's going a little bit more for that. But I think, normally when it comes down to it, it's just a matter of saying, you know what, I'm going to tell you some of the most important things that you need to know. And at the end of that, I give you the opportunity to ask questions. So what I'll do, I love it when clients go off script. I often say, when I'm talking this more senior up the ladder, I'm having a discussion. I'll literally often try not to use slides because they get talked at all day long. They see presentation after presentation, slide after slide. And so I'll sometimes see them visibly relax. If I go, you know what, I have some slides, I might pull one or two up when there's a graphic I have to show you, but how about if we just have a conversation? Sometimes like, oh my gosh, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Bill. And so what this ties into is I'll have my presentation in the little, the overhead slide view where you might have 6 or 9 slides per page, so that I know what the topics are, and I'll just talk to those points. And in my head, I'm going through my presentation more or less, but I'm checking off as I get to it, but it's in an interactive, just conversational manner. And at the end, I might tell the person, hey, we're running out of time. Just give me a minute. I want to hit on 1 or 2 more key points, and I'll make sure I've covered what I need to cover, but I'll do it conversationally rather than literally putting the slides on the screen. But again, my slides would have just been some basic stuff to support that narrative. And it's a way that if I'm prepared to give that presentation, I similarly, the slides aren't the center point for me either. I can just talk through it.
Yeah. No, I like that. I find slides can also be restrictive, because if you are truly making it interactive and meaning it's relevant to the stakeholders, it won't necessarily always flow with the exact same idea that you originally had, because
Right.
maybe their perspective is a little bit different than you initially thought. Maybe something happened earlier in the day, but it allows you to be more fluid with the conversation and get to the value add for everybody, rather than being stuck into the narrative that you pre-created by these slides. So
Yeah, and I think you hit on the key thing, that flexibility. So I'm checking off the topics as I talk to them. We might go through it in an extreme case, the exact opposite order of what I planned, right? Maybe, and that's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, if I've had a meeting with you, I got through the points I wanted, regardless of the order, and you walk out happy and ready to act, that's great with me. Versus people who get hung up on, oh my gosh, Bill, that meeting was horrible. Why was that meeting horrible? Well, they bounced around and you didn't follow your flow and blah, yeah, but who cares? It's not about back to it. It's not about me. It's about them. I'm trying to get them comfortable with this. They don't care about my plan flow. They care about what they want to learn. And as long as I teach them that, they're going to leave happy. They have no idea what my plan flow was. They just know if the flow that we went through worked for them.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. So In addition to making it interactive and being flexible with the presentation, what are some other effective techniques that really help you allow your presentation to connect with the executives and business stakeholders?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is just keeping the slides just so incredibly simple. So, I love to use an example. Even if you had, 5 products for 4 quarters, that's 20 numbers. Then you add subtotals, that's 9 more, and an overall total, that's 30 numbers on a slide. And that's a lot to look at. And the reality is, at any point in time, you're talking about one fact out of that grid. The problem is, I always say, let's say there's 5 products. I'm talking about product three's trend over the past 4 quarters. Well, product people who are worried about product 4 and 5 are in the room. What are they doing the whole time I'm talking about that? They're looking at product 4 and 5 lines and thinking about that and so forth. The finance team's all worried about Q4. All they're busy doing is looking at Q4 across the products and thinking about it. In other words, no one's listening to me. And the points I'm asking them to pull out take a lot of mental effort because you have to pick these individual numbers out of this grid of 30 numbers. So my point is always, again, for a live presentation, make a series of slides with one graph or chart that exactly highlights. So if there's a trend over 4 quarters, I put 4 bars with an arrow pointing up that says 50% increase over the past year. No one can misunderstand it. And again, people get hung up on slide counts a lot. I always say, don't worry about slide counts, worry on hitting your time. I can put up this slide for 10 or 20 seconds, mention, look, this product crushed it. We were up 50% in the past year. Then I can go over here and go, and if you notice, all the products are about equal in Q4. If you notice, I've gone one of the rows, I've gone one of the columns. I might hit every number in that table, some even more than once over the course of my presentation. But I've done it in context where every single point I'm making is completely visually obvious, and there's virtually no way for them to get lost or to be drifting off into other aspects. So I think it's that breaking it down. Now, of course, if I'm giving you something in an email or in a report, it might be just as well to give you the table, even if I do call out those extra graphs. But that's, again, a whole different format. So it's when you're live, you've really got to keep things as simple as possible.
Yeah. So I've always liked the concept of, you're trying to do 1 point per slide. It keeps it simple. It keeps everyone focused. And then it also, I think, helps you build the presentation, because otherwise you can get kind of caught up in what are you trying to show on this slide as well. So I've always thought that is fairly impactful. The other thing is attention spans have gone down quite a lot. I think for the average, promo video that you see, so an advertisement, you have to change the screen or change something visually every 3 to 4 seconds. So when people say keep slide count down, that actually means that there's typically less movement based on how most people make slides. So it actually is probably more engaging to have bigger visuals, 1 or 2 key points per slide max, and then just switch the slides a lot more often as well, in order to just engage people and keep them paying attention to what you're doing.
And you hit on a very good point. I often say to some extent, if you're doing a great job presenting, you technically don't need the slides. I already mentioned how I don't always use them with executives, but in a one-on-one conversation with you, I should be able to keep you engaged, and you're not going to drift off and start doing email. But I'm in front of a room of 20 people. And I've been talking for a while, and everybody over time, their mind's going to drift. It's exactly what you said. Having a slide change is a visual cue that everyone's eyes, even out of their peripheral vision, will see, and their attention will be drawn back. And so by having things change in a regular cadence, it'll give an opportunity for everybody who got distracted to come back in. And so that's where it's good to also pause sometimes. You flip slides, you pause, you take a drink of water, do anything to give it a second or two. So then you start talking again. It'll get a little bit of people's attention. So I think there's some real good strategies there. Another advantage of what you mentioned, 1 point per slide. Let's say I have 3 points per slide, and then we decide later that our flow isn't all that good, and we want to not cover point number 2 and all. Now I'm back to having to completely edit a slide, and I can't easily move things around. When everything's a standalone, I can sort them different ways. I can delete them, whatever I need to do. And it takes a matter of seconds, versus the more you pile on a given slide, the more edits you risk having to make even small changes. And again, if you're coming into a really critical presentation and someone asks for a tweak a half hour before, you don't want to have to be editing the slides as much as just, all right, I'll move number 5 to number 7 and I'll delete number 6 and we're good.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. It makes it a lot easier overall. So, You've also talked a lot about a concept in which you've written about closing with a wow. So, how do you actually leave somebody with something that is memorable and gets them thinking after the meeting as well and really invigorates them to essentially do that next step? So, can you explain a little bit more what this technique is and how to leave that lasting impact on the audience?
Yeah, so the one example I love to use, and this is one, again, technical people can get very stuck in doing exactly what they planned and or were asked to do. So let's say I was asked to assess the success of a promotion from this past quarter on a new product line. And I could come in and do a great presentation that summarizes exactly how well that promotion did. Hey, it made us $1 million. And based on this, we have the budget and the time to repeat it next quarter. So very tactical. Yes, this promotion was a success and we should continue it. And that could be a winner in terms of everyone's going to say, great, Bill did a good job. However, what if that new product was associated with one of the three strategic initiatives the company has for the next 2 to 3 years? And what if at the same time it involved a different type of outreach that we wanted to increase? Maybe it's a direct to consumer in a business that largely does advertising. If I can then say at the end, and by the way, not only did this specific promotion do well and it's worth repeating in the next quarter, but keep in mind this actually ties to two of our five core corporate objectives in the next 2 to 3 years. And so this is also helping us to meet those. And now everybody in the room is thinking, well, the way I get my bonus, the way I get my promotion, it's to help us achieve these strategic objectives. So now I've not only shown them that tactically, yes, I analyzed the promotion and yes, you should do it again, but I've also helped them see how that is just one small piece in the bigger issue of hitting all of our objectives from the strategic plan for the next 2 or 3 years. And that'll just take it all up a notch. People will be double excited if you position that correctly. And equally important then, if you're the technical person who can put in place that kind of a context for that audience, now you'll be that technical person that they know can actually understand their business and understand how to put things in that context for them and not just come and answer their literal questions that they asked.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really comes down to put yourself in their shoes. It's not just talking about how great you are, but it's about how you're helping them have, more success or what's in it for them. That's really what you have to think about to, I guess, as they say, close with the wow. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So I know, I think that's great. It really, pretty much every kind of messaging always comes back to that. And it's shockingly hard to truly implement well. It does take a lot of practice to get that right, but when you do hit the nail on the head with it, it can be a very, very powerful thing.
Well, I'll tell you, Todd, that it takes practice. I mean, literally, one of the key points I make is you have to practice. So, people don't draft an important email to their boss's boss and hit send as soon as they've typed the draft. Typically, you're going to sit and you're going to leave it for a minute and you're going to review it. You don't write a paper and immediately submit your first draft. You're going to edit it because you have to improve it. But you can easily think to times in your career you've seen someone get up and do a presentation where it's really clear they've never actually verbalized the words they're saying before. They may have had the points on paper, they may have had it in their head, but they haven't actually given that presentation. And so from a preparation perspective, you've got to literally practice, go through the dry run. You'll find all the spots that you're stumbling on your own words and that you realize you weren't as confident in the transition as you thought. Equally important to that preparation is the shortchanging of time to build a presentation that is typically present. So if it's the end of of an important 12-week project, what a lot of folks will do, they're working up to week 11 and a half, 11 and 4 days, getting as all the technical stuff together. Then they throw together a presentation, and that's an absolute horrible way to do it. Versus back off at least a week, require that you've got a draft done that now I can look and think it's good, but then I run it past a teammate. Then we run it past somebody from that's technical like us, but wasn't involved in the project. So they can find things that don't make that they think we're assuming too much because they wouldn't have known. And then maybe go to a friendly on your business sponsor side, run it past them so they can say, hey, this is all good, but you should really put more on point number 2 because we're focused on that more right now. And if you
Yeah.
do all those things in practice, you're going to come in and have a winning meeting versus throwing it together at the very end. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is they don't truly budget the time and make the project plan stick to it like they would with other components.
Yeah. I think what you said, you did say verbalize, and I think because you actually mean literally say it out loud. It's not just about reading through it. It's not just about being like, okay, I kind of get it. Truly saying it out loud makes such a big difference when you are
Yes.
practicing things or recording yourself and listening to yourself speak. And as you also mentioned, bringing in other people, because sometimes when you are iterating through a presentation, you might be like, oh, this point is so obvious because you've associated it a lot with your presentation, but somebody who hasn't, seen it 20 times at this point has not. So they still need that extra context, even though it feels old to you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So a lot of organizations are moving more towards self-service analytics, which means that people can get data in more real time, and that's what they're starting to get more used to compared to having more static presentations. So how is this reshaping the role of data professionals when they're presenting and explaining insights, especially as if they're using static presentations, or are they pulling up more interactive dashboards?
Yeah, so a couple things tied to that. One is, so we talk about data literacy. There's this whole data democratization has been a super hot topic. And, I think it's a really good thing. To me, what it says is when technology and user sophistication has gotten to the point that some things are just repetitive and straightforward, and we can automate that instead of having to have a person do it, I think that's a good thing. So I sometimes chuckle when, an analytic person might say, oh my gosh, I'm getting nervous. We're automating all these things because what am I going to do for a job? And I always say, you know what? Are you really enjoying creating the same report time and again manually? Probably not. And if this is the only value you're adding, whether you produce it or whether it's automated, you're not going to keep a job just doing that. So you need to always be pushing the envelope. And so a great example of this is I remember a few years ago, I had a person at a conference when I was talking about data democratization said, well, I think we'd all agree it's safe to kind of democratize basic reporting and BI, but it seems really dangerous to democratize data science type initiatives. And I told the person, I said, well, I think your premise is a bit flawed. I said, today, yes, I think most people would agree it's okay to democratize basic reporting. But I said, that wasn't the case in the early days. I mean, I was there for it. The early days of these enterprise reporting tools, they were very technical. I mean, they still involved a lot of handwriting SQL or at least, sanity checking SQL. It was hard to deploy. You had very technical people building those reports. And over time, it became okay to democratize it. So in our everyday life, I like to use the example of cake mixes. So 150 years ago, you wanted a cake, you had to sit, get all the raw ingredients, mix it yourself, put it in a wood or coal-fired oven that didn't have any temperature controls, and try and get a perfect cake. It was art form to create a good cake and a heck of a lot of effort. By the time I was a kid, we had cake mixes. So this is like basic reporting. A cake's a pretty basic thing. It has some flour, some sugar, you add a little egg and milk, and now you have a perfectly temperature controlled oven. Virtually anybody can make a very, very solid cake without any real skills. Although, again, a experienced chef will beat your cake, but most people don't need that every day. Well, data science equivalent, what about a gourmet meal? We would have said, there's no way. I can't cook very well. I couldn't do a gourmet meal, but these days now there's these kits you can order. They'll send you all of the pre-apportioned gourmet ingredients along with a detailed menu and videos you can go watch to walk you through it to where you can now actually make a gourmet meal, albeit a gourmet meal that was pre-planned. You might not be able to create your own gourmet meal. That's where I think we are with data science today. If it's a response model to identify who to market a product to, and it's the same type of model on the same underlying customer behavioral data, I can give you an application where you can hit a few buttons to kind of select your time frame and the product. And so it can rerun that same kind of model and very safely get you a good result without having to bother me at all, much like you could with the gourmet meal. Now, when you say, you know what, Bill, I love these two meals. I want a meal that's kind of in between those two, but with a spicier sauce and chicken instead of beef, etc. Now I might have to come and make that recipe. So I think that's the key with how these trends are going is that whatever was really complicated a few years ago is probably going to start to be more automated. You can democratize it. You can let people do it themselves. Whatever is fairly easy today, you need to be starting to think about, all right, how do I fully automate it? Because if it's getting easy and getting repetitive, I can offload it. But I haven't seen a time in history yet where there's not then the next level that you need to go to. And so, just the last few years, generative AI's hit. I mean, nobody knew how to do that stuff 2 years ago. So, if you had a full plate load of rather boring, mundane analytics to do, and you couldn't offload those by automating them, you'll never get to go and experiment with generative AI to go to the next step in your career.
Yeah. I think the metaphors that you gave were really nice examples of how that works and really how the evolution comes. But I mean, part of it is just it's fun also when you get to push the boundaries and you get to
Yeah.
upskill yourself. It just, I think that's what makes us human, is really just how can you really improve what we're doing over time and keep things interesting.
Yeah, I know it's funny. I asked, but sometimes people ask me, like, let's say you're a chief analytics officer or a VP, and they'll be, hey, Bill, you know what? What are the most important things I should make sure I, get my team upskilled on and this and that? I always say, well, I'll be honest with you. Your top performers, instead of you figuring out, go ask your top performers what they've upskilled themselves on that you didn't even know about in the last 3 months. Because I promise you, your top performers are out self upskilling all the time. And that's why they're one of your top performers, and they'll know exactly what they've done to help improve it. That's in context of what you need, and then have other people who are not as strong follow what they do. But the people who are really good, they self select them their way through the latest tips, tools, technologies, whatever it may be, because they're being proactive, and they don't need a whole lot of guidance.
Yeah, no, that's very true. So, as we're looking, more at the result, like how to present results as well. So, when we are presenting them, we oftentimes are dealing with uncertain and probabilistic results. So, what approaches work for presenting these nuances without undermining the entire message that we're trying to convey?
Yeah, so a couple of threads on this one. So first of all, the reality is sometimes that uncertainty matters and sometimes it doesn't. And this is where you don't want to over focus on something. Let's assume, for an example, my analysis shows that there was a 10% lift plus or minus 2%. So somewhere between 8 and 12. On the surface, that sounds like a pretty big range, right? I mean, you're like, oh gosh, that doesn't sound too good. But let's say that in order to make this thing pay off, we needed to clear 4%, right? At the end of the day, 8 to 12, when I only had to clear 4, it's a runaway winner. And so, sure, I can do my diligence and say, yeah, it's 10% plus or minus 2. But here's the key thing, folks: we only needed 4%. This thing should at least double that. Let's go do it, right? So I think that's the one thing, is there are cases where the uncertainty isn't as important, and you don't really need to worry about it. The other thing is to stress the uncertainty to the level that it would be unknown. So, every time you ever hear about an investment on TV, or you talk to someone, they always have to put a disclaimer. Well, past returns are no guarantee of future returns. So do they have to say it? Yes. But are you unaware of that? 99.99% of people are not unaware of that because they've had it hammered into them. And so you don't need to have a whole slide on past returns are no guarantee of future success. Keep that in mind for everything I'm about to talk to you about, right? It's obvious. Now, on the other hand, if I'm in talking to a doctor about a surgery and there's literally a 50-50 chance of dying, now that doctor better say, hey, you know what? I want to really sit down with you because this is truly a 50-50 shot. You need to understand it's a coin toss if you're going to come out alive. Have you thought that through? And so I think it's a matter of managing how much you focus on the risk, how material it is, and then also at times just focusing on, not in the blowing smoke, covering up the negatives way, but what's positive. So let's say we have a whole series of products. I've completed an analysis on everything but one, the specialty category. And I come into a meeting and I can say, hey, this program's working great on all 9 of the products that we've done, but we haven't yet done the analysis on the specialty products, so we can't yet say it's working company wide, and it'll be next week before we have it. I mean, it just puts a downer on the whole thing, and it makes it sound like we have to wait till we know about specialty products versus saying, you know what, we've got really awesome results for everything but specialty products. We can get started on those implementations right now, and we're going to have the results for specialty products within a week. So by the time we're done with these other ones, we can either just finish that last one off, or if somehow it doesn't follow the same pattern, we don't have to do anything at all. But you're focusing on what can we do today? What's the actions we can take today with certainty, even though there's still some uncertainty left in the entire picture that we hope to complete. But people can focus on those initial actions they can take today that are very positive and focus them on those. You don't cover up that there's more work to do, but that more work to do you shouldn't let it take away from the exciting findings you have, because people will remember the last thing you say, and the negative things will stick in their mind more. And so if you finish with that couple of negatives, or you focus too much on them, that's what they're going to leave the room with, rather than, hey, I can go start for 9 out of 10.
Yeah. Or another technique that people oftentimes use is to sandwich the results, or not the results, but sandwich the negative news as well. So you put it in context and say, this is how we can potentially combat it as well. So they aren't stuck with just the negative feeling at the end. So,
Yes.
Bill, I have one last question for you. I think you've been sharing a lot of really great tips for how to do these presentations, but from your experience, what's really the best piece of advice that you can give to organizations that are really looking to improve their data communication practices?
So a couple things. One is don't accept that presentations should be poor, right? I think a lot of people, most people are bad at giving presentations. Let's be honest here, right? Most presentations you sit through at work, probably a lot of times you might leave and say that was good information, but you were bored, right? Or their slides were ugly, or they were reading their notes too much. So I think you have to just say, you know what, everybody, not everyone's going to be a rock star at it, but nobody should accept sloppy slides with unpracticed delivery, right? And part of that then is to actually focus on getting people some training in these areas. You know, it's out there. People have training. I do workshops in this. There's plenty of people do these kind of things, and get your teams focused on improving what they do in these areas. And I think most people tend to enjoy learning in general, particularly if they can see some tangible evidence. And then, as we already talked about, is require that your project plans for anything major include explicit time for putting together the final report and or presentation, and then make sure someone sticks to it. So let's say we have a project team of 5 of us. It doesn't mean that literally all 5 of us have to stop the week before the presentation. Let's say we're a little behind on some pieces and there's work to do. What it means is at least 1 or 2 of us has to stop that week ahead to be getting the presentation together while maybe the others are still working. But you have to get that focus on there. And I think just, that's a very easy, tangible step of you better be backing up. And I want to see every executive should say either myself or someone on my team has to see a draft of what you plan to present 3 days ahead. And if you don't have that ready, we're postponing the main meeting, because I don't want you to come into me with your first draft PowerPoint the first time you've spoken the words and have that be what's in front of me, because it won't be as effective for you or for me.
Yeah. I know. I think that's a great advice. I love the idea of sending it beforehand, like 3 days beforehand, to make sure that you do have it ready and that you have everything together, because you do need to be prepared. You shouldn't be doing everything last minute.
Yeah, and I'll throw not even necessarily sending it, because delivering it. Like literally, we have a meeting. I'm going to present it to you or someone on your team 3 days ahead back to it, so you can actually hear it and not assume what I might say to those slides. So it's ideal for everyone if I do a complete dry run for you. And it may not mean we're going to the boardroom and I'm standing in front. It could be a quick Zoom, a little less formal. But the point is, you'll get the vast bulk of the information and how I plan to present it. And then you can give me meaningful feedback on where it was strong, where it was weak, and what you might suggest differently.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I love it. I think it was great advice that you've shared throughout the entire episode. So thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Decisions Now. Check out all episodes at evalueserve.com/podcast, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes.